Hello YouTube, G-String G here. It's been a while since I talked to you, so I decided to sit down and make a video just going over some news highlights and things that have happened in the media over the past couple days. I'll start things off by giving a congratulations to George Stroumboulopoulos. If you're an American watching this video and that name doesn't ring any bells, it will soon. He's started a new series on CNN. This is a kind of dumbed down, sterile version of what he does in Canada on CBC. The difference being is that when I say dumbed down, I mean it's less complicated. It's the CNN version is an interview show. That's pretty much it. On CBC, George has a similar show, but he interacts with comedians and interacts with other little games and things that he plays with the people that he's interviewing and so on, and it takes more of a comedic approach, where the CNN version seems to be more, well, like I said, sterile, very to the point. But he still has an interviewing style that he can ask a question that gets straight to the point, without offending, without provoking in any sort of negative way, and it just helps people open up, and they let loose with stories that you've never expected out of these people. And he's made a lot of revelations on his shows, so definitely take a watch. He's just got a summer contract with CNN. It's kind of a temp thing. Hope he gets a permanent contract. Hope it's on a more reliable network that hasn't referred to CBC as being a socialist, and I mean that in a negative context, although I don't think socialism is a bad thing. But they've referred to it as being like this negative federal government doctrine to the people of Canada, because it's so horribly misunderstood by American media. And in fact, here in Canada, the federal government has slashed funding to CBC, and there's a lot of people within the CBC and supporters of CBC that are actually trying to get the federal government to put more money into it, and some people are even putting their own money into it. But anyhow, moving on from there, George, don't leave CBC. Stay with it. Stay with the fight. But moving on, another Canadian highlight is that the flooding in Alberta. Now, for people that are watching this that don't know a whole lot about Canada, Alberta, it fits all the stereotypes of the United States state of Texas. It's an oil-rich area. It's a lot of cowboy hats and things. The same exact stereotypes that you'd picture in Texas, that's Alberta. The big story coming out of that right now is that there's a town called High River, which I can't help but point out the irony. If you live in a town called High River, you would come to think that sooner or later the river might actually get higher than normal and you might be flooded. But in any event, these houses are being flooded. The police and military are going door to door by boat, searching for pets and things that are left behind, anybody that had been stranded after the flood, and so on. And while they're doing that, they're noticing that there are weapons that are left unsecured. So they're seizing these weapons, tagging them, and they're going to return them after the area is clear for people to return. That's all well and good, but some people, including the Prime Minister of our country, has spoken out against it, saying that it's wrong for them to take guns away from people. And I think that's completely stupid, because what good is a gun going to do you in a flood? If it's in a house under flood water, it's not going to help you. What it's going to help is vandals that go in to loot these towns, because the police and the military cannot be guarding your home 24/7, and there's nobody regularly there to protect it. That these vandals will get their hands on it, and then that makes a bad situation even worse. So that's why the police and military are doing this. They haven't come out and said that, but that's why. So stop being an idiot, stop complaining about it, and the NRA guys down in the US that are going to really hate this video, go ahead and hate it. I don't care what you have to say. I don't agree with pretty much anything you have to say anyway, and really I'm waiting for an intelligent argument about anything you have to bring forward. But anyhow, moving on from there, we'll go into the American media. Obama, he's in Africa. Yay. That's big news in the U.S., not so big around the rest of the world. There's a bit of coverage here and there. Mostly it's suspicion coverage from outside media. U.S. media is touting it as being a great thing and good thing for America, but they don't know how or why or when this will pay off. The international media is just thinking, why is he trying to go to Africa unless it has something to do with oil or diamonds or jade or something else of that nature. So there's this push-pull with the media if you're on the outside and you can see both sides. But one of the things that sent up a flare for me and my opinions is that the family of Nelson Mandela, if you haven't heard, he's not doing too well. He's been in hospital now for a while, and he's had an infection that's filled up his lungs. He's been on and off respirators. He's been in critical condition, stable condition. He's been home and back to the hospital and so on. He just turned 94, so realistically, it's not looking good for him. If you've got something wrong with your lungs and you're 94 years old, you don't have a lot of time. So just this morning, the president of South Africa said that he was in critical but stable condition, and he hopes that Nelson Mandela can return home soon. I see it as if he returns home, he's probably going into palliative care. So that's just the reality of the situation. It's not that I want to see the guy pass away or anything, but we've learned a lot from him. He's shared a lot of knowledge, and he's shown a lot of people in South Africa the way to equality and acceptance, which is a very valuable lesson in itself that not only helps people in South Africa but around the world. He's an inspiration for everybody, really. And but to say that he's the be-all and end-all of it, that after he dies that'll be the end of it, that's the wrong attitude to take. I think that whenever he dies, there's going to be a big funeral. That's it. The revolution that he had started, the progression in the country is going to continue, and it's like when Che Guevara was being accused of being the liberator of the Cuban people. He said, "I'm not a liberator. Liberators do not exist. The people liberate themselves." And the same thing is in South Africa. It's not Nelson Mandela that's going to wave a magic wand and liberate you. You have to liberate yourselves. So he started the democratic process, but he hasn't finished it. He can't finish it. And he knew that whenever he started, that it's going to be an ongoing process that requires the cooperation of the people. And even his own successes were not done alone. But it has me wondering, though, if the family does not want Obama meeting with Nelson Mandela when they have met before. That has me thinking that with my own experiences, that when somebody's sick or hurt, you don't want somebody around that loved one who will upset them. Now, Nelson Mandela has had visitors from his family. He's had visitors that are friends of his. He's had visitors that are other government officials from other countries. But they don't want the President of the United States visiting. So it has me thinking that this might be tied to what Obama is really in Africa for, because Nelson Mandela was also a big supporter of the working class and union organizing. His own political party started as a prison union. So to say that that Obama should be visiting him and so on, it might be very upsetting to this man who is not in good health and is elderly, to try and explain in a way without upsetting himself to a young leader of a nation that the path that they're going down is not fair for the working class people and actually leaves people starving and only feeds the corporations and feeds the politicians and doesn't help the people. It would be very upsetting, I imagine, for Nelson Mandela. So that's something that I think the American people have to grapple, is that what Nelson started is not what Obama stands for, and that's just how it is. That they are, as much as the American media likes to paint them as the same, they're very, very much different. And most of the American media is right-wing anyway, so they see anybody that has an independent thought of any kind as being far left liberal, but believe me, Nelson Mandela is much more left than Obama could be. So, anyhow, moving on, there's also, what was it, Paula Deen. Paula Deen is not a big name in Canada. Paula Deen's a big name in the U.S., and even more so now because of a particular N-word that was used. And that led into discussions and conversations on the N-word itself and its meaning in the public, and how offensive is it really, and should she lose her job over it and everything. I know people that have lost their job over less. Should she lose her job over it? Well, with her being the boss, she ran the show. If the network wants to drop her, if her sponsors want to drop her or anything, this is a problem with being self-employed, is that if you offend the people that you're relying on for your income, they will no longer purchase your product. And that includes a TV show, that includes a book. They won't buy that because they don't want to do business with you. They're offended by you. All the apologies in the world sometimes do not work. But what I have to say is, I can't help but notice that whenever there are other racial terms thrown around, there's not the same reaction. It would be very interesting to look into, and for any sort of anthropological studies kind of people that are out there, maybe some students that are looking for a summer project, maybe you want to look into the culture of language and how different racial connotations and slurs affect human development and human interaction. But in Canada, not a big deal. Her story particularly, not a big deal. But the use of racial profanity in Canada is still a big deal. Not discussed a whole lot in the media because it's more discussed one-on-one. People are more open to discussing that. I just live by a simple rule: call people what they want to be called, and don't use terms that generally offend people, and you'll be fine. So, another thing that I should mention too from American media, same-sex marriage. I have to congratulate the Americans on this. Your Supreme Court has walked you into the 20th century. I know the calendar says 21st century, but this is the 20th century if you use this benchmark as a timeline, because you're still behind the development of the rest of the nations in the world. Well, the rest of the developed social nations anyway. There are still some that are further behind in this for other reasons, and they're lacking development in a lot of other areas as well. Not just on a relationship or sociological development, but they're very underdeveloped in just their basic infrastructure. So they have larger concerns to worry about that would benefit the public at a much larger scale. But whenever you arrive to a point of development where there are schools, homes, transportation, and there are regular roads and railways and things laid in place, you have to start looking at what benefits particular groups of people, because if you have to start with that base of what benefits everybody, and then start working on what benefits particular groups. This benefits a particular group, being the same-sex couples that want to be married. At the same time, it's taken you this long to realize it doesn't negatively impact the not same-sex couples that want to be married. And it definitely doesn't impact the same-sex couples or non-same-sex couples that do not want to be married. It's just an agreement between two people. That's it. So, congratulations for finally figuring that out, that it really doesn't change things for anybody outside of that house. Anyhow, another point that I should get into here is, because it's 14 minutes, but Edward Snowden, global news, and camped out in Moscow, last word on media, although nobody can confirm that he actually arrived there, and then he was supposed to go to Cuba, but he was going to either Ecuador or Venezuela, but anyhow, the whole story started from, this is a guy that told the world what he did for a living. That's what he's guilty of. He's guilty of saying that he is a contractor in an agency contracted by the US government to just sift files, to do the sifting of files for internal spying. That's it. And this was already known that this was going on. He's just stepped up and said, I'm one of those people. And now it's an international manhunt, and it's leading to a standoff between the US and Russia over something so trivial of somebody saying that this is what I do for a living and I have access to this information, but he hasn't released any of it. I mean, for that matter, they might as well arrest the President of the United States, because he said that he is the President of the United States and he has access to this information. What's the difference? So I think that Snowden put himself more at risk than the nation, because he's exposed himself as being somebody who does have access to that information, and he can be blackmailed, he can be kidnapped, he can be corrupted in some way by somebody that has ill will to the US and to use that information against the US. And who's to say that he's to give that information up? He may end up being found dead in an alley somewhere because he won't cooperate with somebody who's wishing ill will on the American public or the American government specifically. I have to say that as somebody outside of the United States, that people generally don't wish ill will on American people. It's American policy. The American foreign policy is bad for everybody. And so that's why there's a backlash when American people leave the United States. And that's why the American government becomes even more paranoid, is because they sense this backlash and they're scared of that. And then they're scared that whenever one of their own, like Snowden, wants to sort of just let it known that, yeah, the rumors that you're hearing about the government spying on its own people are true. And I'm one of those people that worked in an office doing that. Well, that's all he did. And I don't see anything wrong with that, as I wouldn't see anything wrong with that if there was a Canadian agency here that was a contract agency working with CSIS that said, we do this or that, or that we watch G-String G's videos all the time to pick out things that we can find. And if an agent came forward and said, that's what I do for a living, okay, great, glad you're bored. So anyhow, that's a rundown of some highlights here, and should also mention with the Snowden thing too, there was a, and it's funny that I'm even kind of overlooking it, because the media sure did. The second in command of the U.S. National Defense, he's actually released documents directly to the hands of a nation, specifically Iran, but a nation that has been aggressive back and forth to the U.S. He's released documents of their spy maneuvers and potential military operations in Iran. And that made headlines, but very limited headlines, because they're saying, well, they're going to have a meeting and look into what they can do about that, what they would do about that. But this man's still walking free and has his job. So, Snowden says what he does for a living. He's an international stowaway. Second in command of the military, directly hands things over to the enemy, and well, we'll see if that's a problem. So yeah, it doesn't make sense. But anyhow, I'll leave you with that, and thanks for watching.